Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis, and today I want to give a little bit of love to Brassavola nodosa and talk a little bit about its care, where it's from, and basically let you know how you can grow it in your collection. It's just such a great species. It's interesting because the flowers are just sort of white and green, and maybe there's some spots in there, but ultimately it's just a perennial favorite that everybody seems to love. Everybody really loves the hybrids, and the hybrids grow similarly to how the species grows, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the species grows, some of the tips and tricks that you need to grow it well in your collection, and how to make sort of a small plant that you probably buy in a 2-inch pot into a much larger plant, really in no time at all. A well-grown nodosa grows really fast. They're very weed-like in their growth when they're happy. So let's take a look at this nodosa and then talk about how to care for it.
All right, before we jump into the care, I want to talk a little bit about the species origins, where it is in the wild, show a few in-situ photos to help set your mind, get your head in the right place regarding where it is growing naturally, and that can really help inform you how you're going to grow it in your conditions. So if we take a look at iospe online, and you can see what I'm talking about here. Uh, Looking at the species profile, if we scroll down, we can take a look at where this plant is native to. And it's a huge range. It's basically the coastal lowland areas of a significant portion of Central America, and even in the northern portion of South America. And so, of course, a species with that much range is typically fairly adaptable to various conditions, and that's true for Brassavola nodosa. And also, when you have a species with that much range variability, often you'll get different sort of forms of the species, and this is true. There's a form out there called Minnie Mouse, which is literally the plant is this tall, and the flowers are a little smaller. Then we also have something called what used to be Brassavola grandiflora, and it was thought that grandiflora, as you can imagine, the name grandiflora means large flower. It's got a larger flower than most of the Brassavola nodosas, but it was given its own species status for a while, and then that's been pulled back. So for whatever reason, everything in its whole range is simply Brassavola nodosa. But you can see here, it's Mexico all the way down to Venezuela and Colombia. So that's a huge range. And I mentioned earlier that I found this one growing in Panama. And I'll show you an image of that, or actually a Google Earth Pro video of where I was seeing that growing wild. But you can see that Jay Fall also found them growing at sea level, where the ocean occasionally can splash them. So I'm not the only one who's seen this. So again, I'm not saying that you need to splash your plant with salt water, far from it. But it just shows how really sort of tough and durable this species is. So if you're going to start with a Cattleya species as your first one instead of a complex hybrid, this is a really good one to cut your teeth on. And so there is a really cool photo in situ that you can see here, and you can see that this is a jungle plant. It's fairly bright, but it's not full blast conditions, full blast sun. Whereas some of these other ones, as you can see here, these are growing in full sun, with no shade at all, and then just some monstrous plants here on these royal palms. And if we check out this site, you can see just it's humongous. So super cool. Again, like so many species that grow under these really harsh conditions, it's not needed, but it does give you an indication of how much light this species like and how quickly it tends to want its roots to dry. For many of these photos, even these ones growing on rocks here, you don't see any significant amount of media around the rocks or sort of anything that's going to hold on to moisture, right? So So they do want their roots to dry quickly. And not to belabor this, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but this is where I found them growing. And here's a quick shot of Google Earth Pro. I was down at the Achatinas Bay in Panama. Actually, let me zoom out a little bit. This is where the very seasonally dry forest is in Panama, on the sort of boot heel on the Pacific side. And so I was staying here at the tuna farm at the El Laboratorio de Achatinas, and then I was wandering around the jungle here, and I walked down to the ocean, and this is where this area had tons of Brassavola nodosa in the trees, and this is where the waves were splashing and dumping that ocean spray onto the plants. So again, the fact that it was in a very seasonally dry place gives you an indication of their watering as well. So they're going to want plenty of water during the growing season, and then much less water in winter. Anyway, let's take a bit of a deeper dive into their care.
Hey, if you found this video at all helpful, please feel free to hit the thanks button down here at the bottom of the screen. Any contributions, like $1 or $2 even, would be super helpful in getting me to other cool places around the country so that I could film different shows, or even back to Brazil. As always, thank you very much appreciated. All right, so here we have a smallish nodosa. This is one that I got a couple of years ago, in a 2-inch pot from one of the times that I went to Florida. And then you can see it's still blooming. The best time of year for blooms is really fall. So these are sort of the extra cleanup blooms. But then this one actually bloomed for me a couple times a year. So it is not uncommon to just continuously get spikes like this one. This one just has a single flower, kind of like these. After the sort of main flush of blooms, you just sort of get these straggler blooms sometimes. And in the spring, I can get a couple of straggler blooms as well. But really, fall is the best time. But you can see, like I said earlier, this is, there's nothing particularly amazing about the flower. There's not a whole bunch of colors, but it's a cool shape. They've got some spots typically. And it's just easy to grow, and the smell at night is so incredible. I absolutely love it. But this one, as you can see, is basically devouring this pot. And actually, you can see these roots growing over the side here. I had to rip these off of a neighboring pot because they had fully engulfed the neighbor's pot. And so when I moved this inside for the winter, it was kind of a mess. And now we're taking a look inside the pot so you can see at least a little bit. I've watered this, so hopefully you can see the roots a little better. But basically, this pot is entirely covered in roots. And in here, so of course this is a clay pot, and also it's got osmunda fiber inside. But typically, as you know, I prefer to use orchid bark, and that seems to work great. So as far as the media goes, whatever you use needs to be fast draining. This species really, really likes fast draining media. They don't want to stay soggy at all. They really want to drain quickly. Probably at about the same rate as a typical Cattleya, or maybe even a little bit faster. You can see they have these succulent leaves. And these succulent leaves mean that they are very drought tolerant, and they are a-okay with being dry for longer periods of time than an orchid that doesn't have these sort of thick, fleshy leaves for storing water. And so if you have fast draining media in, like I said, a clay pot that dries out fairly quickly, or if you're in a very humid area, mounting them works really well. If you're in a very dry area, maybe have some chunky bark on the bottom and a little layer of sphagnum on top. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. Whatever you can do to plant these so that they dry out in, tops 2 or 3 days. I prefer to have them dry out basically every day. When I hit them with water in the summertime, it's every single day. But again, that's because there's not much media in this pot. It drains quickly, and it's in a clay pot, which drains or dries much faster than a plastic pot. Water quality is not really an issue with these guys. They'll take whatever is available. Tap water. They're super hardy. In fact, when I saw these growing wild in Panama on the Pacific side, they were just covering the trees. What was really interesting was that this was right on the coast, and there was a ton of huge waves splashing over the rocks, and this incredible amount of sea mist just drenching these things. Direct ocean water covering these things. Of course, they get washed off when it rains, but still, it just goes to show that they're very hardy and not super particular about the quality of water that they need. Fertilizing, I typically fertilize at the same rate that I fertilize everything else, which is, probably about 50 parts per million of nitrate every single watering. And so if I'm watering every single day in the summer, that means that yes, this is getting fertilized every single time I water. But again, it's just such a tiny amount that it really emulates or mimics the natural conditions of how they survive. So you can see what this looks like in the full sun right now. I can't grow this in full sun during the heat of summer. It's just simply too hot. But if you're in a place that's cooler, these can absolutely take a lot of sun. They really want to be bright, and you can replicate the brightness that they like in a couple of different ways. If you're in an area that's not too hot, certainly get them in full sun. But you'll have to acclimate them, of course, like any plant or person. Really, you can't just put a person or a plant in full sun and expect it to do well. Or if you're outside and you can grow under a shade cloth of some sort, you can do what I do and grow. I'm in South Texas, so it's very bright, very hot, but a 50% shade cloth is absolutely what they need. If you're farther north, like you're in, let's say, Pennsylvania, or you're in Europe, anywhere in Europe, you could probably maybe get this in full sun, depending how far north you are, or even just under a 20 or 30% shade cloth. They really do like a lot of sun. And again, they do best. They flower the best if you can get this sort of color leaf where it's this sort of light green, and then you can even get the leaves lighter green in brighter conditions, and the plant will be just fine. You can see a leaf that's fading here right now. So this is an old leaf that's about to fall off, but you see that level of yellow is probably too much. But if you look at this side of the leaf where it's more yellow than the rest of the leaves, that's an okay color. They will produce a lot of blooms in that situation. Additionally, if you have access to sort of dappled shade from a tree that's kind of covering the mid to late afternoon sun or evening sun, and that's how you provide shade in the summertime, that'll work really well. I used to do that quite a bit at my old house near Austin, and in that place I would just have my cattleyas and nodosas under the dappled shade of an oak tree, and that worked really well. Additionally, if you are growing under lights, you want there to be a lot of light. So you can see the top of my plant to the top of this plant is a little farther than my hand, right? That's too far. So this is an insanely bright light and absolutely just blasts so much light onto my plants. I absolutely love it. This is Flora Wave lights from Carnivoro. So what do I do instead? I actually grow this one back there in the sort of orchid dungeon. And the top of the leaves are much closer to this light here. And all of my really high light loving plants are here. All right, in the comments, let me know how successful you've been with growing nodosa or one of its hybrids, and whether or not you've had any difficulties and what those difficulties are. It's always good to sort of share those experiences so we can all sort of, as a group, see what's happening to different folks, and then maybe comment and provide input on how to better grow those plants. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Have a great weekend. I will talk to you next week. Bye.